Hello and welcome to Australia's Economic Outlook for 2024, proudly hosted by Sky News and the Australian newspaper here at the beautiful Crown Sydney. The keynote address was delivered by the Prime Minister just a couple of weeks after delivering his third federal budget. It also came at the pointy end of an election cycle as well. No firm dates on when that election might be, but certainly laying out of what his priorities would be should he win a second term.
Ahead of today, I look back to the economic challenges that we spoke about this time just a year ago, the aftershocks of the pandemic and the impact on inflation and supply chains, the continuing devastation of conflict in Ukraine and now the Middle East, of course, as well. The most significant international energy crisis in half a century, and the heavy toll of natural disasters for communities and our country. All of that uncertainty is still with us. All of those issues are still live, which is why the progress that our economy has made through the past year stands as such a powerful tribute to the hard work and resilience of the Australian people. It's something I spoke about during the pandemic as the Labor leader. The responsibility that we had to aim for more than just getting through the crisis and putting it behind us, learning the lessons and applying them to build something better. And that's what our plan for a future made in Australia is all about, building our economic sovereignty and strengthening our energy security so we're no longer the last link in the global supply chain, deepening and diversifying our trade links, what we trade and who we trade with, so we're not overly reliant on any one country or commodity, moving ourselves up the international value chain with our quality products and our services and our expertise, and investing in clean energy to power a new generation of advanced manufacturing, making Australia a renewable energy superpower and making more things here. Right now, we're in the early stages of the most significant global economic change since the Industrial Revolution, and also the most clearly signposted. Nations representing 92% of the world economy are committed to net zero. This includes 97% of Australia's trading partners. We don't need Andrew Clennell's crystal ball to see where the global economy is heading. We know the destination, and we know how virtually every nation plans to get there by embracing clean energy, solar power, wind power, green hydrogen. And in order to meet their targets, every nation will need more of the resources and technology that go into producing this energy, the metals and critical minerals and rare earths that Australia has in such abundance. This isn't a bubble, it's not a blip. It's not a nuclear fantasy dreamed up to delay real action on climate change. This is not a passing economic shock. It is a lasting economic shift. And Australia is home to everything that we need to put ourselves at the very centre of it. This is where our new Future Made in Australia Act will provide commercial rigour, ensure value for public money, and help us to attract more private capital. But just as our budget was about delivering tax cuts for every taxpayer and energy bill relief for every household, our plan for a future made in Australia seeks to bring new growth, new secure jobs and new opportunities to every part of the country, our cities and suburbs as well as our regional communities. This plan, like our government, is pro-worker and it's pro-business. We want every Australian to share in this opportunity for our nation. And we need to draw on the talents of our whole population. In business, there is no final point of perfection. In economic reform, there is no last word. In government, there are always new pressures to manage, new challenges to meet, new global uncertainties to confront. But I can tell you, 2 years after I had the extraordinary honour of being elected the 31st Prime Minister of this greatest of nations, I have never been more optimistic about Australia's future and never been more determined to deliver that future for the Australian people.
Well, Prime Minister, thanks for attending this event once again. A passionate,
Good to be here.
Passionate and optimistic speech. Now, my first question is, to coin a former PM's phrase, are we in the per capita recession we had to have?
If you look at the global economy, there's nowhere you'd rather be, in my view, than Australia. If you look at our growth, it's stronger than just about all the countries in the G7. Our employment growth, we've had 820,000 jobs created since we came to office. At the same time as you're seeing real wages grow. There have been international pressures. There are a number of countries that are in recession. We are not.
But it was pretty anaemic growth there at 0.1 for the quarter. Is that what you actually deep down want to see and what the Reserve Bank wants to see? Because that's the way inflation comes down and rates can be cut.
I want to see growth, but I make the point that I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around. When we made the changes to the tax cuts that we made earlier this year, that wasn't universally welcomed by every paper in the country and every broadcaster in the country. It was the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do because it's providing that support when it's needed.
Well, with the budget being such a driver against inflation, you must still be expecting a rate cut this year.
Well, they're decisions for the Reserve Bank, and I'll leave that to...
The Deputy Governor's here.
I'll leave that to the Deputy Governor to make an announcement. Look, our job is to look after fiscal policy, and that is what we've done. And you can't do more than produce two budget surpluses, not produce mugs, actually produce surpluses. We've done it. We turned a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus last year. It's a $100 billion turnaround.
The 2.75% inflation prediction in the budget by the end of the year, are you confident in the prediction? You didn't look at that number and go, well, how does it get there? It's been sticky for 4 or 5 months.
No, well, they're Treasury predictions, and they're based as well on the policies that we've got in place.
If there's no rate cut coming for the next few months, wouldn't you be better off politically going to an election in November or December?
Good try, Andrew, but I remember it's not unprecedented for a Prime Minister to announce an election date well in advance, but that didn't end all that well.
Why should Australians give you a second term?
Because we've been an effective government, because we've delivered a stronger economic position than the one we inherited. We're dealing with inflationary challenges. We're creating jobs. We're dealing with the immediate challenges which are there in the economy. We're also looking after social policy. We're a government that governs for all Australians, including we have gender equity at the heart of our government's agenda, be it paid parental leave, 10 days domestic and family violence leave, the gender pay gap being at a record low.
What are you offering, though?
Cheaper childcare.
You've said to caucus the Cabinet's crafting an offer. Can you give us any sort of hint at what that offer will be?
Well, there'll be an election campaign that has a lot of offers in it, and we'll do that at the time. But we are continuing to roll out new policies that aren't just about the immediate, but are also about the future. The Future Made in Australia agenda is how we set ourselves up.
Let's talk about energy, because it was a large part of your speech. You promised an energy transformation over the years. You talk about a renewable energy superpower, kilometres and kilometres of transmission lines, thousands of kilometres, renewable energy to take over. You could never see a situation where technology moves to the effect that you could see small modular reactors. I think Don Farrell was just in Singapore for a meeting, the IPEF, where they signed up to an energy agreement which talked about some countries developing small modular nuclear reactors.
They're not there. They're not there. And Australia, the International Energy Agency, has made it very clear that whilst for some countries nuclear power makes absolute sense, for Australia, because of the natural advantages that we have, we don't have a comparative advantage when it comes to nuclear. We have a disadvantage because we don't have an industry, and it would be more than a decade and a half before anything could happen. And in the meantime, what do you do to plug the energy gaps when coal-fired power stations close?
We're kind of out of time, but I'm going to crave everyone's indulgence. I have 2 quick questions left. John Howard famously once said he would consider his future as PM at age 64. He then reneged, of course. You're 61 now. Provided you're re-elected, when would you consider retiring?
Gee, you're very confident about the election, Andrew, is the premise of that question. I thank you for your support.
I said providing.
I thank you for your support and the endorsement of Sky News. Look, I'm one of the youngest. When I sit around a G20, it makes me feel pretty young.
Prime Minister, thank you. Please thank Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
It's business that create the jobs and prosperity, so it was fitting that journalist Claire Harvey was joined by Uber, Amazon, Crown and the Minerals Council of Australia.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having us, Kieran, at this beautiful venue. It's
Very
absolutely
welcome.
wonderful. Now, I'm going to start with Tanya Constable, Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Council of Australia. We heard the Prime Minister talking about, among other things, the budget. Australia has immense potential in rare earths and critical minerals. The federal budget contained incentives for processing critical minerals and for hydrogen production. It's fair to say the opposition is sceptical. I think we can safely say the Greens are going to be much more than sceptical about that. Are you hopeful that this is actually going to be delivered?
Claire, there's, I think, some good things that were in the budget related to critical minerals. We've got a competitive advantage in the resources industry, and I will say at this stage that we can take some responsibility rather than the fiscal management for the budget. The surplus has been delivered on the back of the resources industry.
Yeah.
Yay! But in terms of, it's a difficult environment we've got at the moment. In terms of productivity, investment in Australia. So it's understandable that some within the industry would be calling for incentives. So it was good to see that there were a number of things delivered. Streamlining of FIRB approvals, exploration, potential within the future made in Australia, but we've got to see the detail, particularly around production tax credits. At the moment, we think that it will be for processing and refining, but there's one major issue there for us, and it's got to deliver additional investment. If it's just about investment in what we already have, then it's a failure. It's like the car industry. We don't have any real additional value add. So I think the jury's out. We'll work with the government to make sure that we see the right projects coming through, and hopefully that will deliver additional investment at the end of the day.
Emma Foley's the Managing Director of Uber Australia and New Zealand. Emma, you probably delivered most of us here today, so thank you very much. But resources, energy, electricity is a big part of the future of your business. Why is Uber so keen to be a significant player in the energy transition?
It was really encouraging today to hear the Prime Minister speak so much about the transition to net zero. It's definitely a very important thing for Uber. We've got a global goal and a goal here in Australia to get to net zero tailpipe emissions by 2040. The reason that's important for us as a business, we obviously feel a big responsibility, and we know that because of the, outsized number of kilometres that rideshare drivers drive, we can have a real impact here if we get things right. In Australia alone, we've got over 150,000 drivers and delivery people on the roads, and so getting that right and getting that transition to net zero kind of humming is really important.
Kieran, you helped to bring Taylor Swift to Australia. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I hope you got to make a whole lot of friendship bracelets. I
received a few. I didn't make too many.
They're very fiddly. They're hard for people with big fingers to make. It's a genuinely impressive investment that you make in big touring acts, bringing bigger international acts to Australia. What does the hospitality sector need to do to ensure that at the grassroots level, pubs and smaller clubs, that music acts, Australian music acts, have the opportunity to actually become superstars?
Entertainment fund has been part of our DNA for 30 years, and we celebrate 30 years this month actually as a Crown brand. We're now reinvesting back in that, and Taylor Swift was obviously the most high-profile component of that around large-scale entertainment. We've just announced a partnership with the UFC on the sports side, because people want experiences now. One of the things we're seeing, what is driving a trip, what's creating a trip, whether it's somebody locally here in Sydney coming to the property, one of our other properties, an interstate trip, or really, very importantly for us in the hospitality industry generally, the international trip, are the experiences that people can have rather than just a meal, a drink, or something more tangible. The smaller events that we want to put on with local musicians, local bands. I'm a huge lover of live music myself, and everybody enjoys that aspect of going out to a pub, enjoying a band. But there's a limit where you can sit in a pub, sit in a bar with 50, 80, 100 people. If the next scale is the MCG, providing a product and an offering in between is critically important. As we're looking out on our investment plan through Melbourne and Perth in particular, our ability now to go out and take some spaces that were primarily and previously really dedicated to just the casino guest, and as we more pivot to what the rest of the world has done in our industry, and move away from being just a casino, being so casino-centric, and taking so many of the facilities that were geared towards the casino punter, and now handing them over to great restaurants, great bars and great venues for live entertainment. And we've already launched a couple of those in Melbourne recently. We're in the process of design and building one out in Perth. And that's a great opportunity for local live music.
Janet Menzies is country manager for Amazon Australia. Janet, you work for a gigantic company. I've read some of your interesting anecdotes of what it's like coming into Amazon's very established corporate culture. But here in Australia, you're a disruptor. You're causing trouble. You're apparently destroying the hard-working businesses of Coles and Woolies. What's it like making that change to disruption rather than being the big, powerful, established player?
Right. I mean, look, I think there's three things that we get to work on, which I feel really proud of. One is, of course, one of the things about Amazon Selection is a lot of it is contributed by small businesses. So this whole notion that we can digitize and build the capability of Australian businesses to then be on not only our site, but in the bigger leagues of the, as you say, the more established markets like the UK and the US. So that's a really great privilege in terms of being able to build that capability. Second thing is, of course, we've got AWS, our sister brand, who brings really interesting data products to the table. And then the final thing, of course, is building the retail brand. And, you know, when if I think about 10 years ago, when I looked at the retail experience in Australia, I think we could all agree it was a bit of a, you ordered something, you hope it showed up on time. And, you know, I think we've played a small role in inspiring us all to get better, and also built a business that now has raised the standards for Australian consumers. And I think that that it provides evidence of is that a good way to really, for government to encourage innovation is that mix of supporting local business and also encouraging innovation to flow into the country that can then support local capability. And so, you know, for me, that's really what it's all about, is making sure we work backwards from the customer. We say, what is the e-commerce experience and the retail experience that Australian customers deserve, and then how do we deliver it?
Andrew Hauser, many thanks for your time. The Prime Minister earlier said that he wouldn't tell the Reserve Bank how to conduct monetary policy. Do you care to tell the Prime Minister and the government how they should conduct fiscal policy?
I had a meeting with Ross before this interview, and he said he wasn't one for a gotcha question.
No, it wasn't. No,
and that's not a gotcha question.
It's not a gotcha question at all.
Look, I'll tell you something actually about commentary on fiscal policy. I was brought up in a culture where it really wasn't for central banks to provide a running commentary on the decisions that democratically elected governments take. Those are difficult decisions. They're ones that they're accountable to their electorate for. And, you know, outside of a financial crisis, and unfortunately I had to deal with one. We had to deal with one with the UK quite recently. I think it's for democratically elected governments to make fiscal decisions, and it's for central banks to do the job that they were given to do by the public, which is to bring inflation down to the target level and to keep it there. Having something called inflation that you can't control and gets into every decision is incredibly toxic. I actually think central banks, when inflation picked up a couple of years ago, forgot this for a little period of time. They forgot just how crucial inflation has played as a role in long history. I mean, without wishing to be hyperbolic, it's caused wars.
So you believe what is being tried here in Australia right now is something different to what is conventional monetary policy theory by central banks in other parts of the world?
Every country has its own objective, to use technical term, objective function or your objective.
Yes.
In Australia, it is a more balanced objective. That is obviously quite similar to the objective in the United States. So I don't want to say I think that Australia is on its own. I think every central bank is seeking to bring inflation down in a way that maximises or minimises the losses to employment and to output. We have a particular weight on that strategy. And to be honest, so far that strategy has worked.
But
it's a narrow path, but it has worked.
Because I want to go to this narrow path, because traditional monetary policy from central banks would be go hard with interest rate rises, you can crunch your economy potentially into recession, unemployment rises, and eventually then the inflation comes out, you can cut interest rates.
Well, I disagree with that, Ross. I don't think that is, or you may say traditional, maybe that was true in the Volcker area, for example, in the US. But I think we've learned since then, and most, if not all, central bank mandates include the idea that if you do the kind of thing you describe and really go macho on growth, you are going to bring inflation down, for sure, but you're going to keep bringing inflation down to zero, to negative. And we know that actually we talked about inflation being costly. There's one thing more costly than inflation, and that's sharp deflation.
Well, a part of the new mandate for the Reserve Bank is that it communicate better with the public and with business. And in Andrew Hauser, I think you've just experienced that new era of communication at our central bank. Andrew Hauser, many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And that concludes Australia's Economic Outlook for 2024, proudly brought to you by Sky News and the Australian newspaper. And it would not be possible without our generous sponsors, Crown and Uber.